lot of people think that a podcast is this thing that shows up on Apple or Spotify or even maybe YouTube and the show that people listen to in their ears. We've seen it really become like an entire marketing engine for some companies that can provide content and top of mind awareness in sort of the social media world. We took over that show and after producing, I think, close to 1,000 episodes of Perpetual Traffic, we ended up doubling the show's downloads in a matter of several months, and we did it again over the next sort of period. The amount of business that was sort of coming from it, both from clients coming in from the show, it was generating some ad revenue at the time.
Podcasts can be really useful, whether the ICL is large or maybe small, but is a podcast for everyone, for any business, or are there businesses that are better off?
Businesses that have long sales cycles, those can really benefit from having a podcast, because instead of having a sales cycle, happen over 6 months, that sales cycle can be compressed into, a couple of weeks. An entirely new audience of people is like solely consumes clips, and they will never listen to, a full episode, but they would consider themselves fans or subscribers of the podcast. Recording a show for the clip is something that I think is really valuable.
When it comes to launching a podcast, what is something that most people get wrong?
All right, welcome back to the Amazing Marketing Show. Today's guest is one of the few people who actually figured out how to make a podcast profitable and help grow their business and help do it for others. Hector Santiesteban is the founder of Amplafy Media. Is an agency that helps entrepreneurs turn their podcast into profit centers and not just be some other content on the internet, not just some passion project. He's a producer of the legendary marketing podcast, Perpetual Traffic, and many other really successful podcasts. So we're going to get into asking him some pretty specific questions here. This is going to be exciting for Chris and I, because quite frankly, we want to figure out how to grow our podcast too, and how to turn it into a profit center more so. Before I bring on Hector, I want to tell you to subscribe right now. If you're watching this for the first time, just go ahead and do it, because you're going to want this coming up on your feed. You don't want to forget about this show. So go ahead and click subscribe. It's going to be good. And before we get to Hector, Chris, my co-host, what's up, man? How are you?
Dimitri, what up?
I'm living the dream. Excited to introduce Hector. Hector Santiesteban, what's up? Welcome to the show. Tell us about you.
Thanks for having me, fellas. A while ago, someone asked me to introduce myself without talking about my family or my job. And so, that sort of stuck with me. And I'm this, nerdy, curious, someone who's way into, probably too into conspiracy theories and, just stuff like that. And stumbled upon podcasts and media and internet marketing is sort of this way to grow my business, and allows me to be home with my kids when I'm, when I want to be, and, work from home in my nice home studio garage.
Man, Hector, you've done these podcasts, you've helped grow podcasts, so on and so forth. And my question to you is, with all your experience, when it comes to launching a podcast, what is something that most people get wrong?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that a podcast is this thing that shows up on Apple or Spotify or even maybe YouTube, and they think that it's this this show that people listen to in their ears. But what's interesting is that over the last several years, podcasts have really evolved into more than just an interview show or a conversation show. And obviously with video coming into play, it's really morphed into more than just that. And we've seen it really become like an entire marketing engine for some companies that can provide content and top of mind awareness in sort of the social media world, but also an opportunity to create relationships and networking. And, we're helping people use it in the sales process. And it's this tool that is so much more than just a link on Apple or Spotify. And I think some people miss the real value that can come from having a platform like this.
I think a lot of the listeners of this show continue to, or at least at some point, heard Perpetual Traffic, one of the biggest shows in the marketing space. And we're hoping to hear what are your insights and what you learned from producing that show.
Yeah, we started. I have to, in full transparency, we stopped the production of that show. We're taking more of a consulting based. Our business model is sort of shifting out of the production only focus, and we can sort of talk about why that sort of happened. But I remember we took over that show, and after producing, I think close to 1,000 episodes of Perpetual Traffic, what's interesting is just seeing the amount of. That was the one that really showed me the potential for business that it can create, because it was a great show that people were, I remember when we took it over, we ended up doubling the show's downloads in a matter of several months, and we did it again over the next sort of period. And the amount of business that was sort of coming from it, both from clients coming in from the show, it was generating some ad revenue at the time. It was just, for me, I thought, oh, a podcast is this cool way to create some content. It's this cool way to, create some clips for social media, or maybe I can interview some people. But after a while, it sort of became clear to me that it can be this real marketing engine that, drives business. And for some companies, it can be the entire marketing engine. And it can sort of fulfill all the things that, that a marketing team would do when it comes to content or messaging and things like that.
Hector, so I like what you said about Perpetual Traffic and all the amount of the deals, the businesses was going through, both from guests or sponsors and things like that. So say I'm looking at starting a podcast, right? I'm trying to figure it out. AEO is a big thing. You want to be everywhere. You want to do content. You want to have podcasts, all that good stuff. I think I could best frame the question with a comment. Last week, we had our boy Austin Armstrong on here, and I was asking him about just making content in general. And Austin said that one of the biggest things that he tells everybody is that you're not a content creator, you're a business owner who's creating content, which shifts the paradigm. So now if I'm looking to create a podcast, instead of going to the podcast like, oh, I'm just going to be talking about, I don't know, basketball or something, how does somebody go into a podcast from a business perspective as opposed to a content perspective? What tips would you give them?
A lot of business owners have like an ICP, right? And we just call it an ICL, but it's your ideal client, listener, right? And thinking about that person is probably the biggest, like the first step. And the downside or the reality of that is there actually might be less ICPs or ICLs than you might think. There might be less of those than it takes to be a top chart or a number one, podcast in the world. And so the expectations are sort of really important. If you're going to try and be a Joe Rogan, or you're going to try one of these mass appeal shows, it's a different kind of show. It's a different kind of business model, and it's sort of a different path. But for a business owner who has a product or service that's already established, they've already found some, product market fit, it can really be the tool to gain that awareness, to get people to sort of notice you in a crowded environment. But more and more today, the trust is so important. I think that's really what can be developed. And it's not about necessarily always going wide. I think Perpetual Traffic had a unique benefit of being one of the first marketing podcasts like out there, like ever. And so there was a much bluer ocean. But today the ocean is so bloody and so chopped up, but that doesn't mean that you can't find your own sort of special niche or your own, hyper targeted group of people. I forget who wrote the 1,000 True Fans. I forget who sort of popularized that concept. But that same thing can be taken into a podcast. And we have one show that's in an industrial services niche, and super boring show, super boring industry. But they have like almost, I think they have a little over 600 people every week that are committed, subscribed, listening to the show. And what's interesting is that when we sort of run the numbers on how many buyers are in the, how many buyers we're capturing, like we're talking to like 10% of the people in the entire industry, the possible buyers. And so it's not necessarily about going as wide, but really creating something that your ideal prospect is going to be interested in, and being consistent. There's so much to being top of mind when those people are ready to hire someone like you. That content sort of just is that it's kind of a drip method, right? It's like it's sort of a drip sequence that is sort of on steroids, if you will.
So podcasts can be really useful, whether it's for whether the ICL is large or maybe small, but is a podcast for everyone, for any business, or are there businesses that are better off staying away from it?
We've found, and this is just who we've tend to work with, and I think that there are some plenty counterexamples, but we find that businesses that are service-based or high trust sort of environments where that are maybe the service is even sort of commoditized, like a marketing agency, like a lawyer, like an accountant, where the service is sort of the same. The differentiator is the value that that individual brings. Maybe it's the trust, the expertise, or even sort of the relationship that is there. And so we find that the businesses that have long sales cycles, that require multiple meetings or really, like I said, this high trust environment, those can really benefit from having a podcast, because instead of having a sales cycle, happen over 6 months and take 3 to 4 different meetings, that sales cycle can be compressed into, a couple of weeks. Someone listens to a podcast and there's a couple of, meetings and follow-ups, but so much of that trust, so much of the, the questions that they have, so much of that is filled in through the content that, we've had people that their sales process was literally years, got shrunk down to months just because people would binge. And, people who they had no prior contact with are reaching out and going straight to, hey, can you submit a proposal? We listened to all these episodes. You're the right person for us. And they sort of skip all the preliminary sales, process.
Hector, I got a question for you. It might be kind of big, so feel free to take your time on it if you want, or answer concisely, whatever you want to do. Dimitri and I, we get people to listen and we're like, okay, well, how can we get them to listen again and come back and come back? So how does one build a podcast that keeps people coming back? What are some of the key factors to make that happen?
I think, one of the unexpected things that came to mind is like the recording a show for the clip is something that I think is really valuable, because so much of viewership and awareness from podcasts comes from the shorts, the TikToks, the Instagram reels. They've done studies and they found that an entirely new audience of people is like solely consumes clips, and they will never listen to, a full episode, but they've consumed, they would consider themselves fans or subscribers of the podcast, but they only listen to clips. And so I think understanding that and trying to sort of create content that is going to fit into those bite-sized pieces is helpful, whether that's the questions that you're asking, the topics that you're asking. It could even be, knowing that, a certain perspective is going to be, it's going to get people's attention more than others. So I think that understanding that those little clips are valuable. And if you can think ahead, I think Patrick Bet-David was sort of the person who kind of popularized this. But when he interviewed Tom Brady on his show, he already knew the clips. He already had the thumbnail. Everything was already built out in advance of the interview. And so I don't know that it needs to be that scripted, but you can start to think about those things and be intentional about some of the repurposed content. The second thing that I would say is that it's not the easiest thing, but is like it's much easier to keep someone's attention for 60 seconds, to go on a rant for a 90-second or even shorter YouTube clips. To keep someone's attention for 45 minutes for an hour is that's a much bigger challenge. And I think some people downplay, oh, Joe Rogan, he's just talking he's just talking there. I don't think that they are seeing the amount of skill that's required to hold someone's attention for 3 hours of time and to continue a conversation that is, engaging for that amount of time. And that takes time for the guest, or for the host, especially a lot of the business owners who they didn't come from media training. They were not creators naturally. A lot of times we're working with executives that they're just sort of getting thrown into this, and becoming a host is this new skill that they're starting to develop. And so the media training aspect of that, I think, is just something that can't be undervalued. And I would venture to say that almost nobody I know in the space is like spending time getting better as a host. When people start speaking on stages, they have speaking coaches and they have, TEDx speaking. There's a whole industry around making people a better speaker. A lot of people, they hop on and they're like, I can chat, I can talk. And it's like, okay, yes, but is that the most engaging? Is it the best, use of positioning for the guest. Like there's all these nuances that can happen, or that can be developed. And I think that more time can be spent for those people, especially hosts who see, doing this for a long time, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, and it's something that they want to keep doing, in the way that someone would improve their golf game. I think that, it's helpful to improve your skills as a host.
So then how does one go about identifying nuggets and clips in the podcast, or setting it up so that they know when to pick the nuggets and clips, similar to what Patrick Bet-David did?
Yeah, this comes back to like the listener, right? And really knowing the things that are going on in that, ICP or ICL's sort of day. And I find that a lot of people, when they're getting into content, business owners specifically, they get very excited about their solution, their process, their mechanism, their 4 Ps or their 5 steps or whatever it is. And that's all great. But if they don't know that you're talking to their specific problem, they're going to skip right over that. And so we found the study on episode titles recently that came out. And what they found was that episodes that were titled with the solution based performed something like 20x, or let me frame it the other way. Titles that were problem based, right? That were challenge based. Here's the problems that you're experiencing. Here's what you want to avoid. Things like that. Those ended up performing 20 times better than a solution based sort of one. And so just that simple frame of what's the challenge as opposed to the solution, I think can go a really long way.
I'm taking notes on that. And by the way, if you want the notes for this show, you click the link in the description, you sign up for our newsletter, you get the notes to every show every week. It's a no-brainer, in my opinion. I mean, the notes that I'm taking right here, you're going to get to your mailbox. Okay, so my favorite way to learn is through example. I always learn best in example with math and all subjects pretty much. So let's take our podcast, for instance. I'm not going to ask you like a general question, what do you think we should do with our podcast? But let's just start with what show type might be best. I know that you could do like solo, interview, narrative, a hybrid. But what are you seeing work best for B2B, and what might work best for us? And just to give a little context, Chris and I both run marketing agencies. Chris has Red Palm, which works with local businesses near me. And I work Big Life Marketing with nationwide and worldwide internet companies. What do you recommend for us?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially in a situation like this, is really playing into we'll call them characters or personas. Because each of you serve different people, I think it's really helpful for that to be apparent, right? I think that it's really helpful for the listeners to know, oh, Chris serves local clients, Dimitri serves, so-and-so. Just that sort of positioning, whether that is done in a end role, however you creatively sort of get that out. I think that that's important because so much of what ends up happening is that people go, I didn't even know you did that. And that's just because they know them from the show. They hear their topic, they hear the value, but they're not associating with the service that they provide. So that's one thing. The second thing that I can think about is really dialing into the personalities of people. One of my favorite, growing up, I was a Power Rangers kid, right? And it was like, the Red Ranger was my guy. And some people identified with the Blue Ranger, and some people were the Green Ranger. They were a little more, rebel, like whatever. Everybody had their person that they identified with. And you think about like the SNL cast, same sort of thing. When there's a cast of characters, it gives people an opportunity to relate and resonate more with somebody. And that usually gets people to come back. Because that builds that relationship a little bit more. And so, when we talk about like perpetual traffic, one of the things, one of the previous hosts, Qasim Aslam, who's a mutual friend of Chris and I, he was, he would come in and he would play sort of the devil's advocate, or he'd be the person that's constantly sort of he's constantly picking, or he's not the person who's just going to, take everything and be nice and jolly. He's going to sort of ask the tough questions. And that was sort of his role and character. And that's him naturally. And also we knew that, when we were bringing on sponsors, we were having guests, like that was his role. And so finding your sort of unique personality within that, I think can really help.
Let's say just generally speaking with the shows that you're seeing have success actually bringing in clients for their service-based businesses through podcasts? Are they doing an interview type of show? Are they just solo? Do they have some narrative that they're just reading off of a teleprompter? How's it working?
Yeah, I think what's nice about a podcast is there's no real rules. And so you can create there's no thing that says that it has to be an interview show every time these two people or this person and guest. And so I want to sort of allow people to create what feels right. One of the things that we're seeing working really well is having two co-hosts from the same company. So two executives from, that we have one he's like a COO and the other one's sort of a CEO, and they have conversations. And then they'll switch out and someone will interview somebody and they'll bring in somebody to, as a guest. And what this does is it gives the episodes with just the two of them, it gives them opportunity to create sort of the credibility, talk about what they're doing well in their businesses and such like that. And then when they bring in guests, obviously they're able to leverage their network. They're able to, show some, I forget the term, but there's something that happens when they see you sitting next to smart people, right? There's just some sort of, social equity that happens with that. And so we think mixing those up. And then if there's not like two people that can do that interview show from the same company, doing solo shows and having a mix of solo episodes that are 5, 10, 15 minutes, just sort of spitting knowledge, and then bringing on guests and mixing in the two of those seems to be like the simplest, most duplicatable way to accomplish both showing the value of the business and their expertise and things like that, which you miss out if you only do guest interviews, but also leveraging the network effect and leveraging, other people's audiences by bringing on guests. So we just like to merge the two of those.
You just talked about, how the hosts can play off each other, as well as earlier you were talking about how there's a whole industry that helps speakers, but nothing for hosts. And so what makes for a good host versus a bad one?
I think a good host knows how to keep the ball up in the air, right? There's something to sort of guiding this conversation, and you don't want to be the host that jumps in and cuts people off all the time and doesn't let them to answer. And then you also don't want to be the host that just lets conversations die and the listeners going, well, like, where's this going? So those are the things that are like the first thing that comes to mind. I also think like charisma and energy, like those natural things, but also like playing into that personality. If you're like the nerdy nerd, like be the nerd. If you are the super, bubbly, rambunctious sort of person, like lean into that because authenticity sort of really comes through. And if someone is not being authentic, like that shines through too. And people they can just sense it, especially when they're listening to someone for an extended period of time.
Now, the podcast in the podcast world, the podcast itself is only part of the equation, right? There's the pre part, which is the book, finding a guest and booking them, or finding the listener and getting them to listen, and then they listen to it, or somebody comes on, and then there's the after part. So can you tell us about what the after part looks like in the successful podcast businesses?
Yeah, this is a great point that I think a lot of people miss is the relationship really begins with the recording, right? Especially podcasts are a great way to get in and to have conversations with people that would otherwise not be having conversations with you, whether it's target prospects, whether it's people in the industry, leaders in the political, whoever it is, people want to come on a podcast. And so like knowing that is huge, but also just thinking that the interview itself is going to provide all the value is a huge mistake that I made early on. I remember I got a chance to interview Robert Kiyosaki, one of my like first interviews, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I don't know, maybe billions of books sold, whatever it is. And that was it. I just thought like, cool, great, interviewed him. And I thought like, I'll put him on my, trophy case of people that I've interviewed. And there are a few others, Cody Sanchez, someone I interviewed earlier, before she kind of became who she was. And I've done a little bit better of a job of following up with her, but staying connected. But with Robert, I remember going years and years without ever sending an email, a follow-up, a thank you, nothing, and running into him at an event years later, hoping that he would sort of recognize me. And he's, a little beyond his years a little bit. So maybe that's what it was. But I realized then it was just like sort of this missed opportunity to really cultivate a relationship. And so since then, we really help to sort of engineer that process. And it can be as sort of dialed into the sales process of after the interview, it goes straight to sort of a serve call or like a demo or something like that. Or just having some sort of follow-up process is huge for us. With all of our shows, all of our guests get a little, media package, and they get a bunch of, sample assets that they can use in post. And so it's this sort of, it's an experience, right? And what that does is sort of opens the door for a relationship, for a future connection, for partnerships or whatever it is. And so if people just like take the time to, a couple of weeks after an episode is published, if they just send that guest a text and say, hey, want to catch up for a few minutes, oftentimes that alone has opened so many doors and created so many opportunities because they had such a great experience on the show that you kind of want to capitalize on it.
So that's a really, really good point. That whole follow up. Outside of sending a text, have you seen any other best practices from your podcast companies with their follow up for guests?
What's nice is that we like to lean on media as this sort of excuse to like reach back out. And so, we send the follow up. If it's a high profile guest or someone that we want to just have another reason to nudge, we'll create another little video. We'll create a blog or just something that says, hey, we did this and we just wanted to show you, just wanted to send it to you. Just because staying top of mind, keeping your foot in the door is like so much of the process that if you're just like reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, I want to reconnect for 15 minutes, that's so much less compelling than, hey, here's this little asset that I created. Would you be open to having a call about this particular outcome? Another thing that we like to do that we found has been helpful, and it is best used tastefully because it can. If I came from the sales world, and so I know what like a pushy salesperson is, and it can venture into that. But another thing is after the recording is just having some sort of lead magnet or having some sort of drip sequence or some like whatever the next part of the funnel is. Our favorite thing is saying like, hey, I don't know if it'd be helpful, but I've got this. Do you want to do it? Do you want to have it? Do you want me to send it? Would it be? And just offering that next part of the sales process, like right away is really helpful too, because they're in, peak energy, great experience, relationship has been developed. So that if there is sort of a defined sales process and pipeline that people are working through, it's a great place to ask them if they want to opt into the next step of whatever that process is.
I think you might be the best person to ask this because not only do you have your own podcast, marketing your podcast is what it's called, and you're also working with all these different people in different industries, having their own podcast, seeing what's working for some, may not be working for others, and how many episodes someone's recording. I mean, the variance must be huge. But do you have anything distilled down? This is how many hours this should take per month, or this is how many episodes you should create. This is how much content you need to put out. What's the framework?
I would say that most businesses should be limiting the amount of time that they're spending on the podcast to 3 to 5 hours. And the challenge is that in order to get that down, it's going to need a team that is dialed in, that has the systems and workflows, because if someone is utilizing the right AI tools and they're utilizing the right sort of system, you don't need to be spending lots of time editing it. Right. And so the challenge is if someone is not really educated on what those are, that I've seen that go up to 10, 15, 20 hours a week that they're spending on the podcast. And what ends up happening is you have a marketing person who their job is to market the company, and half of their week is spent on this one project that is that if it's not done correctly, now it's tying up half of their resources and you're not even getting the output that you need. And so that's why we say, like, if you can get it to that place, and with a well-trained EA or marketing person, they can do that. Like anybody can start a podcast. and edit it. And with the tools that are out there, I mean, AI, like anybody who is sort of competent from a marketing standpoint can do that. To get them to the place where they can whip it out and knock it out in 3 to 5 hours a week is probably, there's a range there. But I would say that's probably what the business should be dedicating to the podcast per week. And not just the business leader, right? The thing is that the business leader should really only be spending an hour or so per week on the show, where they're doing the highest leverage thing that they can do, which is either sharing their knowledge or connecting with, high profile guests. And then the rest ideally should be done because, like I said, he can take, I've seen people spend 30, 35 hours on one episode. And I just don't know that from a business sense that's going to justify a significant return.
Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. But then you're talking about tools here. I've experimented with tools like Vizard, and I'm not dissing Vizard, but we were trying to find ways to get automatic shorts created with AI, and it just wasn't the greatest. At least the way we were using it wasn't the greatest. So my question to you is, what tools do you suggest, without getting too heavy in the weeds and too technical, because we don't know the podcast like you do, but what are some just basic tools that you recommend when creating a podcast?
If you would have asked me last week, I would have given you a specific company that we've used to produce thousands of episodes. That they since changed their account, and I'm very upset with them because it doesn't make any sense what they've done. So I'll say it this way: there are things called text-based editors. It used to have to be where if you threw in an audio or a video, you have to cut, you cut and edit the timeline. You'd have to, at best you could see the wave file, the wave, and you can see, oh, they coughed here, or you were editing sounds or shapes. And so that was required you to have to listen to it at a certain degree. There are a lot of companies popping, I don't want to say a lot, but significantly more companies that use text-based editors where it has the transcript, and just like you were editing a Google Doc, you can highlight a sentence or highlight a section. You can Control C, you can Control X, and just like you were editing a Google Doc that's Word, anything that you take out of that transcript is actually going to pull it out of the video as well. And so editing a 45-minute episode just regularly used to take like about an hour. But now with some of these tools, you can listen on double speed. And because you can see the words and you can sort of, hear it as well, you're able to clean things up so much quicker. And so that, I think, a lot of people don't realize how easy that has gotten. And there are more and more. Actually, what we're recording on now, Riverside has that sort of opportunity to do that. And so doing that, I think, is going to save a lot. I've yet to find a good clip generator that pulls out clips from the episode like that consistently. Well, we still have people manually go through and decide this is a really good part because for whatever reason AI says all these tools will sell you the world and they'll tell you that how great they are, but we've just found in practice they're not that great and they still require that human massaging. And so for us, we're doing a lot of training our AIs. So our AIs know who our target audience is. They know what the show is about. They have really detailed sort of information there. And so, we sort of have it give us ideas about segments and things that we can pull and clip, but we're still having a human going and really grabbing the right timing. Because if you start a clip 3 seconds before you should, you've lost it, right? And so it's really, it kind of comes down to where are you starting it? Where are you ending it? What are you pulling out? And right now, the AI tools just aren't quite there to capture that.
One of the things that we're doing internally at Big Life Marketing that's helping our operation so much is really talking about what does winning look like on a certain project or a client, and what's the timeline? And so I want to ask you, in the podcast world, when somebody starts a podcast, what does winning look like and how long should it take?
That's a great question. Again, it comes back to expectations. We have a lot of people that they want to be top on the charts and they want to be, get X amount of downloads and, be globally ranked. And it's all that's cool and all that's great. And that was initially our focus when we first started. We were originally a podcast marketing company. And people just wanted us to get downloads. And they're like, can you grow our downloads? Can you grow our subscribers? Yeah, let's do that. And so we optimized for that. only to look up and have the business, owner go, look up in 3 months and go, okay, this is great, but why am I doing this? Yes, we're getting downloads, but it's not translating to anything of significance here. It's not turning into any business. And so that was for us why we made a really big change in sort of changing our strategy. And so with that being said, if we are not chasing downloads, if we're not chasing rankings and charts, and it's not some vanity sort of thing to make us, feel popular because we didn't have enough friends in high school, which, that was me. But like, if we're not chasing that, then what I see is that by about 25 episodes, the industry starts to notice. That's about 6 months of content, right? To go back for that, you probably within about 12 episodes, if you do your guests correctly, you could probably generate, 1 or 2 business opportunities from those 12 guests. And so that's sort of our first thing is like, how do we get a quick win? How do we get, whether that's a partnership, a client, a speaking opportunity, something that comes from these first 12 episodes where our audience is going to be small? How do we leverage it to get, a real business win? Okay, once the audience is growing, usually by about 25 episodes, the industry starts to notice. That's like 6 months of content where people are, just a little bit more, but right around there, 6 months of content. So people are starting to notice, and on a weekly episode and, things like that, now your industry starts to notice. And so when you start to walk around at trade shows or you go to conferences or things like that, you're not going to see them like liking your post, or you're not going to you will be surprised by how many people go, oh, I listened to your show, or I saw your show. And like, now people have noticed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like that they trust you or that they know that you're the person. And we see that like by the end of the first year is when opportunities start, that's episode 50, if we're assuming like a weekly release. By episode 50 or so, opportunities usually start to come the other way, where people are, businesses in the industry are saying, hey, how can we get involved? We want to be, partners or sponsors, or we want to get on it. And now, so you've got this platform, you've got this party that is actually, it's going, it's bumping, and people want now you're not working as hard to get people to come. You're actually, how do we leverage these opportunities into, to turn them into business? And so that's why what I would say. The nice thing is I compare it to writing a book. Chris and I have a lot of friends who have written books, and the process is usually like a 3-year process where you write the book year 1, you edit the book year 2, and then you like launch it. And the 3rd year is like this promotion thing. And so after the 3rd year, you're a best-selling author and everybody's clapping for you. You got all this recognition, but it was like a 3-year process, and nobody saw you when you were writing it. There was no recognition. There was no notoriety. There's no awareness when you're writing it. Even in the editing process, maybe you're not, there's still limited there. And then by the 3rd year, or that's, after that 2nd year, things happen. I think the same thing happens for podcasts. So like after that 2nd year, is really where we see sponsorship opportunities come in. People, there's actually an audience developed that you can do some, direct to consumer. You can actually, you can run a funnel through your actual show because there's enough listeners to book calls or whatever it is. And so I think if people can have, that horizon of here's where things will be done, and looking for opportunities and looking to generate, business and awareness along the way. That's the timelines that we sort of try and give to people.
You might have already answered it, but earlier you talked about how your media company shifted focus. So again, I think you might have answered that, but will you expand it and be more explicit about how you shifted focus and why?
Yeah, I thought we had more time, frankly, to outrun AI. And, there was, I think even maybe 2 years ago, people were talking about, what things will be replaced with, AI. And I don't think like video, you can create videos. A lot of people have seen Sora or Veo or whatever the sort of image generators. That's great. But I don't think that people realize how easy it is to also create websites and edit videos. And like I built a landing page the other day, almost completely through AI. It was like an AI prompt. I put it into the Go High Level AI sort of thing. And like, it got me like 90% of the way there. And so I think that we didn't realize how quickly the production side of it would sort of be commoditized, and also how quickly, we just had to adjust where the production side wasn't really as profitable as it was, just 6 months, a year ago, because of the cost of AI tools and all the sorts. And so with that being said, more and more people are launching podcasts, but we find that they're still like they have a show, but again, nothing's coming from it. They're sort of spinning their wheels, whether investing time or money or whatever. And so we have just come to really be more of a strategic partner to help people monetize or help people grow. And that's where I sort of thrive, is in sort of this strategic advisor role. Frankly, I just built a production company because at the time that's all people would pay for. And they're like, I don't need your ideas. I just need you to do the work. Now people realize that the work is actually the sort of the easier part to fulfill, but you can put out 100 AI generated podcasts tomorrow. If it's not done with any real intention, or it's not, done sort of with any real purpose or direction, nothing's going to come from it.
We want to highlight your agency, Amplafy Media, and we got the link in the description, and the spelling is AMPLAFY media.com. Tell us about who your ICP is, or ICL.
Yeah, our ICP is, we work with service providers, a lot of agency owners or executives who have so much value and experience sort of locked up in their head, and they've been accruing this experience and this expertise for so long, and oftentimes that expertise is just given out sort of one conversation at a time. And I would imagine that there are so many times where these people are like, man, I wish that was recorded. I wish that we sort of recorded that conversation, because the value or the insights that happen. And so for those people to all of a sudden have a medium where they can just share what they're already usually sharing, but it actually helped to grow and leverage their business, I think is huge. A lot of service providers that their industry is sort of I guess maturing is the way that I would put it. We are talking with a lot of healthcare providers right now and lawyers, because they have to continue to market, and their marketing is going to continue to be a way of how they drive their business. But the way in which they market, so many lawyers and so many, they're used to having bench ads or billboards, sort of this traditional media, and now a lot of them are waking up to the I don't know if I'd say necessity of content, but a real way to differentiate themselves in the market that has some longevity, right? Because once you stop paying on a billboard, they put someone else's face on there. Where if you have a podcast is on YouTube or Spotify, I mean, that's going to be up there until. And so it's really this thing that someone can build that continues to grow into the future. So those are the people that we like to serve.
I know we're running up on time here, but it's not a question as much as it is a comment. Hector, when I first met you at Front Row Dad, shout out to Front Row Dad, Dimitri's the Front Row Dad, by the way. I had asked you about making a podcast, and you'd give me some advice to see if I think the advice was do either 3 to 5 episodes. Don't worry about putting it out. Just do them and see if you like it, and then go from there. And I think it's funny. Fast forward 3 years later, here we are interviewing you on a podcast. And also shout out to you, Dimitri, for you listeners. We wouldn't have this podcast up if it wasn't for Dimitri. He does a lot of the heavy lifting. So it's dope to kind of come full circle and then have you on here 3 years later. I'm
honored, that I could play whatever sort of role in that. And I think that's a good sort of advice, is like that people don't need to, if you just record stuff now with AI and transcripts, even if it doesn't ever, like the full episode doesn't ever get out there, you can turn that into blogs. You can turn that into whatever you want, social media posts. We're also using them now to update like internal wikis and SOPs and processes, because you've got transcripts. And so all of that stuff can now be taken and leveraged with sort of these AI tools to, multiply and I guess to go back to what we started, like amplify someone's knowledge and expertise from just out of their brain.
All right. So if you're listening to this and you're ready to get into a podcast, or maybe you've already been podcasting, it's not been working out, and you really need to bring in some brains and strategy, so you could just focus on this for 1 hour a week and have a team that knows what they're doing, do the rest of the work and do the strategy and help you actually get customers out of this, turn it into a real business lead gen type of funnel. then go ahead and check out Hector at amplafymedia.com. And again, that link is in the description. Also in the description is our show notes newsletter. It's just notes from the show. There's nothing else that we're sending that you might not like. This is only like the best of the best notes that we're putting together. So check that out. Subscribe to the show. Hector, thank you so much for being on. This was really great. Got a whole page of notes here that we're going to apply to our podcast, and I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of it as well.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Hector.